Welcome to Historically Speaking. My name is Jayavardhan Singh, and in this podcast, we talk about everything that is history. So, in this space, I'm going to talk about Shunga history and what are the problems historians face when they try to construct the Shunga history. Before we talk about this, particularly the Shunga history and the different problems that are associated with this reconstruction of Shunga history, I think one example which I like to give to just have a sense of how little we know about the history of, let's say, particularly the period after the Mauryas, is the great example of what happens after the death of Ashok. Now, after the death of Ashok, we know that there are some Mauryan rulers who ruled. There are inscriptions of certain Mauryan rulers. Now, what we don't know is how many Mauryan rulers ruled and what was the chronological orders of these rulers. Now you will find there are multiple theories, or it depends on which author you are reading. So the fact that an empire like that of the Mauryas, and about them we know very little. It tells you how much history of this period, particularly that is the later Mauryas and in the particularly the post-Mauryan period, how little we know about them. So coming to the Shungas, what I think is that I will first try to have a basic summary of the Shunga empire or Shunga history. And this is particularly my view of Shunga history, so I think it is important to mention that. So the basic overview of the Shunga history is that, the year is 187 BC, and Pushyamitra Shunga, who was the Senapati of the last Mauryan ruler Brihadrat, he kills his king Brihadrat, and he occupies the Mauryan throne. Now, I believe that after this accession of Pushyamitra Shunga, what happens is that the Vidarbha region, breaks off. And there are some instances in Kalidas's Malvika Agnimitra, which suggest that Pushyamitra Shunga's son, whose name was Agnimitra, he waged a war in Vidarbha region, and finally we see that Vidarbha region again joined the Shunga realm. Another aspect of the Shunga period, particularly the reign of Pushyamitra Shunga, is that it appears that there was a invasion or multiple invasion of Yavanas or the Indo-Greeks. And according to if we look at Yuga Puran describes the invasion of the Yavanas, and we are told that the Yavana army reached the gates of Patliputra and also occupied the city of Patliputra. Now, this occupation was not permanent. We are told, according to Yuga Puran, that there was infighting between the Yavanas, and soon they returned. Now, this is what we have in front of us. Then there is this inscription which was found from Ayodhya. Now, personally, I have seen this inscription, and the story, I think, of this inscription and my experience with it is also quite interesting. So the year is around 2019, and I was doing a field work in Ayodhya, but this was not related to the Shunga period. It was related to something else. But incidentally, in Ayodhya, there is this great ashram, Udasin ashram. So I was doing some interview with the main mahant of this ashram. So one of the pujaris of this mahant, this ashram, told me that there was this old inscription in the main mandir of the ashram. So I just went and looked at it. Now the inscription is on the pedestal of the main temple. And when you look at it, it will not seem any significant inscription. There are just one line and a half line. So this 2-line inscription. So the pujari there told me that quite a lot of people come and take photos of this inscription, and he was telling me that this is a 4,000-year-old inscription and all that. Although I later forgot about this inscription, but when I was researching about the Shunga period, particularly for my videos, I looked at the scrubbings of this inscription, and it reminded me of the inscription which I had seen in Ayodhya. So when I checked my photos, it was the same inscription. Now, if you go there, the kind of condition which this inscription is in right now, it is quite tragic. But this inscription is the most important inscription when we talk about the Shunga history, because this inscription talks about a person called Dhana. Now this Dhana, he tells us that he is the sixth of the Pushyamitras. Now there are two ways to interpret this fact. One way we could say that he is the of one of the six brothers of Pushyamitras, or he could be the sixth descendant of Pushyamitra. Now, the former conclusion is not valid because the kind of Brahmi that is written on this inscription is of a later date. So suppose if this Dhana was the brother of Pushyamitra Shunga, we would see a Brahmi which would be similar to the Brahmi of the Ashokan period. But that is not the case. So because of this, so this Brahmi appears quite close to the early Kushan period. So some scholars believe that most likely this Dhana was the sixth descendant of Pushyamitra. And we are told in this inscription that the inscription also uses the term Senapati for this Pushyamitra. So the Senapati Pushyamitra, he performed 2 Ashwamedh sacrifices. So this is the important. That's how important this inscription is. Now, incidentally, we can only read 2 lines. Now, we don't know if there are some other lines that are there on the inscription, because the pedestal hides the complete stone slab on which this inscription was written, and the temple in which this inscription resides was built around, I think, 19th or late 18th century. So we have no way to get this information whether the inscription there, whether there is more to this inscription or not. So coming to the question of these 2 Ashwamedh sacrifices. Now I believe that these 2 Ashwamedh sacrifices were performed by Pushyamitra Shunga, and the first sacrifice of this Ashwamedh sacrifice was performed when Vidarbha was conquered by his son Agnimitra, and the second was performed when the Yavanas retreated from Patliputra. So this is the broad overview of particularly the early Shunga history, which I believe. Now there are some scholars who have rejected this whole view that there was a Shunga empire that ruled most of northern India and also the Vidarbha region. And particularly, I'm going to discuss the work of Shailendra Bhandare. Now, he has written an article called Numismatics and History, the Maurya-Gupta Interval in the Gangetic Plains. Now, in this article, basically, what Shailendra Bhandare argues is that he questions the assumption on which historians have, tried to construct the history of the Shungas. Although he talks about other dynasties as well, but other post-modern dynasties particularly, but I am going to stick with the Shunga part of his article. Now, the basic conventional view, as we have discussed, is that after the Mauryas came the Shungas, and after Shunga we have the Kanvas, and after Kanvas we have the Andhras, or we can call them Satavahanas. So this is the basic chronology which we get in our history books, and this chronology is based on the Puranas. What Shailendra Bhandare argues is that when you look at the historiography of the postmodern period particularly, we see that in the in their attempt to historically reconstruct the period of postmodern period, earlier historians have mainly relied on textual sources. So basically the literary evidence like Puranas and other Buddhist accounts. Now, what Bhandare argues is that the material evidence, so inscriptions, particular, and the most important thing in Bhandare's view, numismatic evidence. So basically the coins, so the different coins. So what Bhandare believes is that the use of material evidence is not, these scholars have not relied on material evidence. And there are only some instances where material evidences are used, but these evidences are used to, corroborate textual evidence. So these material evidence are not studied independently. So whenever there is this need to corroborate the textual evidence, what these scholars are doing is that they are looking at material evidence. They are not looking at material evidence, directly. So this is what Bhandare argues. Now, he has also, some critique of the various schools of Indian history writing. So he argues that when you look at nationalist school, particularly scholars like Nilakanta Shastri and R.C. Majumdar, he argues that these scholars have not studied material evidence independently. They relied on textual sources, and to corroborate textual sources, they have used material evidence like inscriptions and numismatic evidence. When he talks about Marxist history writing, he argues that Marxists did not even take into account the chronological aspect of history, particularly when you are talking about history and particularly historical reconstructions, one of the major things which you have to take into account is the chronology. Now, in Marxist writing, we see that according to Shailendra Bhandare, the primary focus is on understanding historical phenomena with Marxist lens. So the most of the energies of Marxist historians goes into understanding historical phenomena through Marxist lens. They did not bother about constructing a credible chronology of postmodern period or even the Gupta period later. So this is what he has to say about the Marxist history writing. And coming to the recent scholarship, particularly the period of late 20th century and early 2000s, he argues that in this period what we see is that the focus of recent scholarship is on topics like state formation, urbanization, socio-economic life, etc. But the crucial aspect of historical reconstruction and constructing a credible chronology of major historical dynasties, this question has not been dealt sufficiently by recent scholarship. So this is what Shailendra Bhandare argues. Now I think that there are some truth to these points which Shailendra Bhandare has made. So to give you an example, if you take any book for, let's say, the famous volumes of the History and Culture of Indian People, which was edited by R.C. Majumdar. Now, if you look at the history of ancient India and particularly the postmodern period, there are only some instances where the chronology that is present in the history and culture of Indian people. So the chronology that is present in these volumes is more or less similar to the chronology that is present in books that are recently published. Now, it does not mean that we have no debates on the chronologies of most of the postmodern dynasties. There is great debate on postmodern dynasties and their chronology. But the fact that the historians have not focused on reconstruction of chronologies means that we have to entirely rely on the previous works that were done by scholars who existed in the period of 1950s. So because of this, there are no new work, and we have to rely on older chronologies. So this is what Shailendra Bhandare has to argue. Now, coming to his point about the Shunga history particularly, first of all, we have to look at the sources which are used by scholars to construct the history of the Shunga period. So for the Shunga period, particularly historians rely on Puranas. And we all know that there are 18 Puranas. So not all Puranas provide us history of the Shungas or information about the Shungas. There are 4 important Puranas which give us the dynastic accounts of North India during the post-modern period. So these 4 Puranas are Matsya, Vayu, Bhavishya and Brahmand Purana. So these are the 4 Puranas which primarily are, these 4 Puranas are primarily used by historians for the Shunga history. Now it is in these Puranas we get this information that there was after the Mauryas came the Shungas, and after Shungas came Kanvas, after Kanvas came the Andhras. So it is from the Puranas we get this information. Now apart from the Puranas, we have other sources also. So famously, Patanjali's Mahabhashya is also used, and we will see, when this source particularly is used by historians when they talk about Shunga history. And apart from Patanjali's Mahabhashya, we have the famous work of Kalidas, Malvika Agnimitra. So Malvika Agnimitra, the hero of this play, Agnimitra, was the son of Pushyamitra Shunga. So this work of Kalidas is also used by scholar to construct the Shunga history. Then we have Bana's Harshcharitra, which also gives us some information about this period. So this is the broad overview of the sources that are used by historians to reconstruct the Shunga history. Now coming to the question of the size of Shunga Empire, we have 2 types of sources, and the information they provide also varies. So first we have the Puranas, and Puranas tell us that the Shungas ruled the region of Kosala, Vidisha and Magad. So Kosal would be the area of Awadh, so basically the central UP region, and Vidisha is the region around Sanchi and Bhopal, particularly the area north of Narmada. Would be under Vidisha. And Magad we all know is the region around the city of Patna, and particularly Gaya district as well. So if we have to construct a political map, it would mean, according to the Puranas, that the Shungas ruled the region of eastern UP, western Bihar and parts of Madhya Pradesh. So this would be the rough map of Shunga realm according to the Puranas. Now Buddhist sources incidentally tell us that the realm of the Shungas extended up to the Punjab region. So the city of Sakala, so this Sakala, some scholars believe that it is Sialkot, but there are other scholars who believe that the city of Sakala was somewhere close to the Jammu Hill region. So whatever the case may be, the Buddhist sources tell us that the eastern Punjab, so the Indian Punjab, was under, we can say roughly, that the Shunga realm extended up to the eastern Punjab region. So these are the 2 sources which tells us different, they provide us different details about the realm of the Shungas. So these are the basic sources. Now coming to the reign of Pushyamitra Shunga, we have already discussed that he was the military commander of the last Mauryan ruler Brihadrat, and he assassinated Brihadrat, and his accession, if we look at the Puranic chronology, happened around 187 BC. Now 187 BC, this date, we have arrived on this date because we have the chronology from the classical Western accounts that when Alexander invaded India. From Alexander's invasion, we can not very precisely, but from 321 BC say, or 322 BC, scholars believe that the reign of Chandragupta started. This date of Chandragupta's accession, this was the Mauryan ruler Chandragupta. So the accession of Chandragupta and the date associated with it is based on the history of Alexander's invasion. So if we believe that Chandragupta ascended the Maurya throne around 321 BC. So if that is the case, what we can do is that we could add the number of years that are that we get from the Puranic list. So from adding those years, we could say that the last Mauryan ruled around 187 BC. And this last Mauryan, according to the Puranic chronology, was Brihadrat. Now, when Pushyamitra Shunga died and how he died depends on what kind of sources you are reading. So there are multiple versions of his death and how he died. So I'm not going to go into it. But his successor, whose name was Agnimitra, is mentioned in the Puranas, and Malvika Agnimitra is based on the life of Agnimitra. And then then we have Bana's Harshcharitra also. So after Agnimitra, there are list of various Shunga rulers. So this is the broad overview of the Shunga chronology when we look it through the eyes of the Puranas. Now coming to Shailendra Bhandare's point, and particularly his problem with the literary sources. So he has multiple problems when historians use Puranas. So firstly, he argues that Puranas are not necessarily historical accounts. He believes that they are semi-mythical accounts, and there are also some differences within the Puranas that historians do not take into consideration when they try to reconstruct the history of the Shungas based on the Puranic chronology. Then the second problem which he points out is that these texts, whether we are talking about the Puranas or the Malvika Agnimitra or Bana's Harshcharitra, are not necessarily contemporary accounts. So if you look at the Puranas, there is historical consensus is that Puranas were composed during the start of 4th century AD, so the early Gupta period. Then when we look at Malvika Agnimitra, it is believed that this text is also from the 4th century AD period, and Bana's Harshcharitra is from 7th century AD. So these three texts are not basically contemporary texts. And when we look at Puranas and Malvika Agnimitra, more or less 500 years have been passed. So this large gap, and the fact that we are relying on half a millennia later text is not the right way to construct the history of the Shungas. Then within the Puranas, according to Shailendra Bhandare, there are different manuscripts and there are different versions that are written in those manuscripts. Now what historians and scholars do is that they try to consolidate different manuscripts into a critical edition. Now this consolidation usually happens in 2-3 different ways. So the most obvious way to do a consolidation of a particular text, let's say the Puranas, is that what scholars do is that they try to see how many verses or how are common in all of the different versions of a particular Purana. And they compile those common versions into a single manuscript or a single critical edition. The other way to do is that is to extract verses that are more archaic compared to the verses that appear to be more that appear to be the product of a later date. So so by analyzing the meters that are used in a particular verse, you could also consolidate a particular text. So these are the different ways to consolidate a particular text. Now, according to Shailendra Bhandare, when we do this consolidation, what happens is that there are minor differences that suddenly gets erased. And another important point is what we see is that some manuscripts are more authentic than others. So because of this consolidation, what happens is that the manuscript which is less reliable is bracketed with a manuscript that is more reliable. So this is also one of the problematic aspect of consolidation. Another point which he tells us is that even within the sources, whether we are talking about the Puranas or Kalidas's Malvika Agnimitra, we see that there are variances. For example, in Bana's Harsh Charitra and Puranas, Pushyamitra Shunga, Pushyamitra is called he is described as a Shunga. But in Kalidas's Malvika Agnimitra, the Shunga term does not appear. Kalidas calls Pushyamitra a Bambic. So this is the term that is used. This also shows that the attempt to rely on these multiple sources can be a bit problematic. Another point which Bhandare has to argue is that there are also problems of interpolation. So we all know that most of these Puranas were passed down orally, and it was only during the British period or during the period of the European colonization that most of these texts were written down. So what happens is that because of this, there are finer details in a particular text that may have been lost. So all of this tells us that we have to look at material evidence also to construct the history of the Shungas. And we have all, according to the Shailendra Bhandare, earlier scholars have not bothered to look primarily at material evidence. We can also say that the Puranas itself evolved. So this is another point which Bhandare has to argue when he talks about the problems with the Puranas. Coming to the scholars who have worked on the Shungas, Bhandare has some critique of these scholars as well. So he argues that there are certain assumptions that are made by these scholars when they talk about the Shunga history. Particularly when these scholars talk about the Shunga history, they provide us a sense that most of the Magadhan imperial apparatus that was present in the Mauryan period, this imperial apparatus survived in the Shunga period. And when you look at the evidence, there are no evidence to suggest that this imperial apparatus, so basically the administrative structure and other aspect of the Mauryan state, there are no sources that provide us this information that these structures also survived up to the Shunga period. Then he has some problems with the association of the Yavanas with with Pushyamitra Shunga, and particularly the invasion of the Yavanas. So he argues that in Malvika Agnimitra, these historians have used a particular episode in Malvika Agnimitra where the son of Agnimitra, whose name was Vasumitra. So Vasumitra would be the grandson of Pushyamitra Shunga. So this Vasumitra fights Yavanas on the bank of Sindhu. This is the information which we get from Malvika Agnimitra. Now, this information has been used by scholars and to corroborate another evidence that is found from Patanjali's Mahabhashya. So Patanjali, in his Mahabhashya, there are two sentences in Patanjali's Mahabhashya that scholars have used for the Shunga period. So there is this line when Patanjali is describing how when he talks about imperfect tense and talking about a event that has recently occurred. So these two lines are Arunad Yavanah Saketam, and the second line is Arunad Yavanah Madhyamikam. So basically, these two lines means that the Yavanas are attacking Saket, and the second line would mean that attacks of Yavana is happening on the city of Madhyamika. So these two lines suggest that this attack of Yavana recently happened. Now, how do we? So this recently happened. So how do we say that? How should we base this on the Shunga history? So for this question, there is another line that is present in Patanjali's Mahabhashya, which tells us, which goes like this. This is Pushyamitram Yaj Yamah. So Pushyamitram Yaj Yamah would mean here we are performing the sacrifice of Pushyamitra. So this line, here Patanjali gives an example to demonstrate an event that is going on. So from this small line, historians have argued that it means that Patanjali belongs to the same period when Pushyamitra Shunga was performing his Ashwamedh sacrifice. And since he is also describing the recently occurred Yavana invasion of Madhyamika and Saket, this would mean that this Yavana invasion also happened in during the reign of Pushyamitra Shunga. So this is the broad argument which historians have put forward to argue that it was during the reign of Pushyamitra Shunga that Yavanas attacked the city of Saket. Saket would be the city of Ayodhya, and Madhyamika. So Madhyamika would be somewhere around the region of Chittauds. Now, incidentally, since we have already discussed that in Malvika Agnimitra, we are told that Vasumitra, son of Agnimitra, is fighting Yavanas on the banks of Sindhu. So Madhyamika or Chittauds is close to the river Indus. So this would mean that these two events are basically the same event. So this is the broad argument that historians have put forward. So Shailendra Bhandare would argue that these assumptions we have based on two examples that are used by Patanjali. Sorry, three examples. If we Madhyamika, Saket, and the Pushyamitra sacrifice of Pushyamitra Shunga. So these three examples of Patanjali and one episode from Malvika Agnimitra has been used by scholars to say that there was this Yavana invasion during the reign of Pushyamitra Shunga. Shailendra Bhandare argues that there are no evidence to suggest that Patanjali, when he is talking about these Yavana invasion, or when he is taking the example of Yavana invasion, there is no way to prove that this actually happened. If we ignore the Patanjali's Mahabhashya, there is Yuga Puran. It is true that there is the Yuga Puran which talks about the Yavanas attacking the city of Patliputra, but it does not talk about the period of a particular king when this invasion happened. So how can historians, by using these three lines and a particular episode from Malvika Agnimitram, conclude that there was a Yavana invasion? So basically, this is the argument of Shailendra Bhandare. When we move to the question of the size of the Shunga Empire, we have already talked about that according to the Puranas, Shungas ruled the region of Kosal, Vidisha and Magadh, and Buddhist sources tell us that they ruled up to the region of Punjab. Now, if that is the case, material evidence, particularly numismatic sources, would provide us similar information. But that is not what we see when we look at material sources. So there are different coins that Shailendra Bhandare has studied, and he divides these coins based on the regions and particularly the coin type. So for example, there are coins from Vats and Chedi. So Vats and Chedi would be the region of Allahabad and southern UP, basically the Bundelkhand region. So here what we see is that most of the coins that are found from this region have the name Kaushambi, the city of Kaushambi attached to it. So this suggests that these coins belonged to the city of Kaushambi. And in these coins, there are also some names that appear. And in most of these cases, we see that most names end with a particular term. The term is Mitra. So most of the name ends with Mitra. So these names are earliest coins have the name Ashwaghosh. Then we have Agraju. Then we have Radha Mitra. Then Agnimita. Agnimita is the Prakrit version of Agnimitra. Then we have Jeshmita. Jeshmita is the Prakrit version of Jeshtmitra, etc. So these are the names that appear on the coins of Vatsa and Chedi region. Interestingly, when we look at these names, only so Agnimit is only present if we take the example of coins of Agnimita. There are no royal titles that are used with these names. Then we move to north and particularly the region of Kosal, so the Ayodhya region or Awadh region. Here we find that interestingly these coins are different from the coins that are found in the Vatsa and Chedi region. So we have seen that in the Vatsa and Chedi region, most of these coins have the name Kausambi in them. So basically these suggest that these coins belong to the Kausambi region, Kausambi city. But in the coins from Kosal region, Kosala, there is no such city that is mentioned. And the coins are also not as, the amount of coins that are found from the Kosal region is not also that significant compared to the Vats and Chedi region. And in these coins, we see that there are two groups of name that appears. So first type of name, particularly ending of the name is Datta, and the second is Dev. So there are no Mitra coins appear in this from the Kosal area. There are one or two Mitra coins, but largely there are no pattern that appears. So and when we move to West UP, so the Panchal region, here again we see that no city is mentioned. And here the interesting thing is that we have three types of ending of names. So first is Pal, the second is Gupta, and the third is Mitra. There are also two rulers who have the ending Sena. So these are from the Panchal region. So basically we have covered the UP region completely. Then when we move to south, and which is called the region of Dasharana. So Dasharan would be the region of, we can say, southern UP, so Jhansi area, and also Madhya Pradesh, so north of Narmada, would be the region of Dasharan. And what we see is that from this region, there are two, from most of the coins that are found in this region, we can classify these coins into two types. So the first coins are the northern coins, and the second are the southern coins. Now, when we look at the northern coins, most of these coins are around the region of Jhansi. And there are two cities that are mentioned. So first is Mugamukha, and the second is Erikachha. Now, these two cities are found in the Betwa Valley. So what we find is that here, the earliest name that appears from the coins of northern Dasharan region has the name Ashad Mitra on it. So who is described as Senapati. Now this Senapati appears on one of the brick inscriptions that are found from this region. And incidentally, on his coins, so this Ashad Mitra, he is called Amatya on his coins. And in the inscriptions, he is described as Senapati. And if we look at the broader types of coins that are found from northern Dasharan region, these coins have two types of ending. So the first is Mitra and the second is Sen. Now when we move to southern Dasharan region, things become quite interesting, because most of these coins are around the city or around the region of Vidisha. So basically the region of Sanchi. And there are 4 cities that are mentioned. So the first city is Vidisha, second city is Bhagila, the third city is Kurara, and the fourth is Nandinagar. So these 4 cities are written on these coins, and most of the names that are there have the ending Mitra. Now what we see is that in these the earliest coins that are found from the southern Dasharan region have a particular symbol. And most scholars believe that this suggests that a particular dynasty was ruling this Dasharan region, now southern Dasharan region. Now, after these early coins, we have some coins in which we see that the symbol of this dynasty who was ruling the Dasharan region earlier, so someone has restruck another symbol on these coins. And we have multiple evidences that these new symbols were restruck on the older symbols. And then after this brief period of restrucking these coins, we have the new symbols appearing. Now this suggests that there was some type of dynastic disturbance, and we can argue that, so this new dynasty usurped the throne, and after restructuring these coins, when new rulers arrived, they started issuing coins with the new symbol that belonged to the new dynasty. Now, interestingly, if we look at the names of the rulers of this new dynasty, we have the first ruler has the name Hatidev. The second name is Bhumidatta. The third is Narayan Mitra, and the fourth is Vashu Sharma. Now, if we look at the Puranic list of the Kanva rulers, there is striking similarities between the rulers of the southern Dasharan region who have replaced a previous dynasty. So the Puranic list, if we look at the Puranic list, the first Kanva ruler has the name Vasudev, and in the coins we see that the name is Hatidev. The second Kanva ruler, according to the Puranas, is Bhumimitra. On the coins we have the name Bhumidatta. The third Kanva ruler on the Puranas have the name Narayana. On the coins the name is Narayan Mitra. The fourth Puranic Kanva ruler is Susharma, and if we look at the coins, we have the name Vasu Sharma. Now, interestingly, after these rulers, we have the coins of early Satavahana rulers from this region. Now, we all know that the Puranas tell us that after the Kanvas came the Andhras, and most scholars are of the opinion that these Andhras were the Satavahanas. And there are also, the chronology that is mentioned in the Puranas is also similar to the Satavahana chronology that we found from inscriptions of the Satavahanas. So it is quite interesting that we have the names from these coins from, the southern Dasaran region. And these names of the rulers are strikingly similar with the names of Kanva rulers that are mentioned in the Puranas. And after them, we have the Satavahana coins. And in the Puranas, we are told that Kanvas were replaced by the Andhras. So, the wild possibility, if we go by Shailendra Bhandare's argument, this Ashad Mitra was most likely who was ruling, the northern Dasharan region. So this Ashadmitra was most likely Pushyamitra Shunga, and this dynasty ruled complete Dasharan region. So basically the whole of the region of southern UP and Madhya Pradesh, north of Narmada. And after this Pushyamitra dynasty, another dynasty replaced, and we can see them on the coins. And these were the Karnavas, and after Karnavas we have the coins of the Satavahanas. So if we go by this assumption of Shailendra Bhandare, it would appear that the Śuṅgas were not, the rulers of northern India. They ruled a small portion of central India, and what may have happened was that the Puranas, they focused on this part of central India, and they have used the history of this part of central India to suggest that this was the basic chronology of the postmodern period. So this is what Shailendra Bhandare has to argue. Now there are other scholars who have provided different theories when you look at the based on the different coins that are found from different regions of UP, as we have discussed. So first theory believes that the fact that we have coins from different centers of Ganga Valley, so the coins from Vatsa-Chedi region, then Kosal, and then Panchal region, and in most of these cases the name Mitra appears, suggest that after the death of Pushyamitra Shunga, the empire of Pushyamitra Shunga was divided, and different descendants of Pushyamitra Shunga ruled different parts of the empire, and to claim descent from Pushyamitra Shunga, they used the name Mitra in their coins or with their names as well. So this is one theory based on the material evidence. The second theory says that these Mitra coins that appear from different parts of the Ganga Valley and also from central India, they basically tell us that there was a pan-Mitra domain. So basically a single Mitra ruler was ruling all of this region, and in some cases different names were used for the same person. So locally the name of a particular person would be different. So for example, this theory provides us a certain example. So when we look at Panchal region, we have the coins of Agnimitra, and from Koshambi we also have coins of Agnimitra. So this would suggest that this Agnimitra that was issuing coins from Panchal and also from Kosala was the same Agnimitra who is present in Malvika Agnimitra and is also described by the Puranas. So this is the second theory. The third theory is quite interesting, and I personally believe that this theory is more plausible. So this third theory argues that the different names suggest that there was a political fragmentation after the collapse of the Mauryan Empire, and these different rulers were basically the feudatory of Pushyamitra Shunga, or the Śuṅgas generally. Now, Shailendra Bhandare believes that, in all of these three theories, there is this basic assumption that is being made. And this assumption is that there was a Shunga hegemony that was present. Now, according to Shailendra Bhandare, there is no evidence to prove that there existed a Shunga hegemony. And most of this so-called Shunga hegemony, according to Shailendra Bhandare, is based on evidence from Puranas, and there are two inscriptions that are used by scholars to suggest that there was a broad Shunga empire. So one inscription comes from Barhut. Now, Shailendra Bhandare believes that the Barhut inscription does not necessarily suggest that the Shunga empire was a pan-North Indian empire. So This is the broad problem which Shailendra Bhandare has when he talks about these three theories. Now, if we look at the numismatic evidence according to Shailendra Bhandare, we can say that after the Mauryan period, there was definitely a political fragmentation that happened. We can say this because we see that earlier there was a uniform silver coinage. So basically the punch marked coins were there and there was some type of uniformity that was present. But after this period, we see that the new coinage are specific to particular regions. And this shows that now there was a political fragmentation and smaller polities emerged, and these smaller polities were based on urban centers. So when we talk about the Vats Chedi, for example, the Vats Chedi region, most of these coins have the name Kaushambe. So this would suggest that these new polities that emerged were based on urban centers. Now, if we go by the numismatic evidence according to Shailendra Bhandare, the conclusion we get is there are 2-3 conclusions that we have. So the first is there was no uniform empire after the decline of the Mauryas. The second would be that there was no single dynasty that was ruling most of northern India. The third would be there were different rulers that were present in different regions of northern India. So this is the broad overview of Shailendra Bhandare's problem with the historiography of the Shunga period. Now, in my view, this point of Shailendra Bhandare when he talks about the Karnavas who were ruling the southern Dasharan region, and the fact that the numismatic evidence are similar to the Puranic evidence. Now, I believe that it could be the case that the Shungas were definitely ruling the region, most of northern India. But after the Shungas, when the Kanvas came, they were confined to the region of central India. So basically the Dasharan region. And the Puranic authors, they basically, we can say, elevated the Kanvas because of some type of confusion with the successors of the Shungas. And after the Shungas, we have the after the Kanavas, we have the Satavahanas. But when you look at the Shunga realm, now it is entirely clear that the Pushyamitra Shunga did not control the entire Ganga valley. But I think that when you look at the Puranic evidence are closer in my view to the reality. So because Puranas provide us the information that the Pushyamitra Shunga was ruling the region of Kosal, Vidisha and Magad. So I think that the realm of Pushyamitra Shunga was restricted to the middle Ganga valley and also some parts of central India. Now, about the Yavana attack particularly, now Shailendra Bhandare simply rejects that there was no way to suggest, there is no way for us to prove that there was a Yavana invasion during the reign of Pushyamitra Shunga. Now, I believe that the fact that Patanjali is quoting these two examples, and then we have one of the Puranas, that Yug Purana. So Yug Purana is describing the Yavana attack on the city of Patliputra. And then we have also the inscription of Kharvel that talks about the Yavana attack and the fact that he had defeated the Yavanas. Now, I think that it is there cannot be a coincidence that these multiple different sources are just making this up. And if you look at the Buddhist sources, there are some evidence which suggest that particularly Buddhist sources talk about Menander or Milind as they call him. So we are told that Milind constructed a stupa in Patliputra. Now this evidence suggests that there was a Yavana attack that happened, And I believe that this attack happened during the reign of Pushyamitra Shunga. And if you look at, strategically, so suppose you are a Indo-Greek ruler. Now, we all know that during the period of the end of 2nd century BC, the Indo-Greeks have control over the Punjab region. Now, the next obvious decision or obvious attack, the target of the Indo-Greeks would be the Ganga plains. And we have, multiple evidence to suggest that after conquering the Punjab region, the next target of every invader was the Ganga Valley. So it is quite reasonable for us to assume that after conquering the Punjab region, the Yavanas tried to attack the Ganga Valley, and in it they were able to conquer the Patliputra city, the city of Patliputra as well. Although after this conquest of Patliputra, they returned. Now, Yuga Puran tells us that there was this infighting within the Yavanas. But interestingly, why this infighting happened is not known. Now, we can assume that there could be the some external threat there was which was present, and the Yavanas had this, there was this debate whether we should try to control the Patliputra region or return to their base. And Yuga Puran tells us that the Yavanas retreated up to the Yamuna river. Now, if I have to assume, I would say that probably the threat from Kharvel or probably a counter-attack from Pushyamitra Shunga would be the reason why there was this, intense infighting between the armies of the Yavanas. But we will talk about the Indo-Greek history in the next talk. So this is the broad overview of the problems that are associated with the Shunga history.